My parents secretly hid the things I threw away. A legacy of love and memories. Winter has come, and I returned to visit my parents after many years of living away from home. This trip back was not only to visit my family, but also with a new intention, to help my parents clean and rearrange the house. As a person who likes neatness, I always pursue a minimalist lifestyle, believing that a neat space with few belongings helps the mind relax, making it easier to focus on what is really important. But when I opened the door to the house, I realized that the work I was about to do would be much more difficult than I imagined. Over the years, the house has become filled with too many memories and belongings. Here and there are old, worn chairs, faded family photos hanging on the wall, and a large wooden cabinet filled with unused items. The house feels cramped and stuffy because of the furniture, and it seems that there are also layers of dust from time. "Mom and Dad, I think it's time to clean up and organize everything," I said, but my parents didn't seem excited. My mother looked a little confused, her hands clasped together. She looked around the house, which contained her entire life, and hesitantly said, "These things, they are our whole lives. I know they're old and probably no longer useful, but I'm not ready to let them go yet." My mother's words made me pause. From a young person's perspective, I thought that old things should be thrown away. But perhaps to my parents, they were not simply objects. Each item carried a story, a memory that my parents had kept for so many years. After some gentle persuasion, my parents finally agreed to let me try to rearrange the house. We started with the living room, which contained the most mementos. Since birth, this living room has been the center of the family, where we shared all our joys and sorrows. We began to clean up each item. When I lifted an old table, my father stopped, his eyes filled with emotion. It was the wooden dining table that my parents had bought together when they first built their home. The table had been worn and scratched over time, and every crack and scratch on the wooden surface evoked so many memories. "You know," my father began to tell me, "this table has witnessed every meal of our family since the very beginning. There were days when we only had a bowl of white rice and some vegetables, but my parents always tried to create a happy atmosphere so that you would feel warm." My mother often said that, as long as the whole family gathers together, no matter how simple the meal is, it will be delicious. Listening to my father's story, I felt moved. Up until now, I had only seen this table as an old item, no longer suitable for modern life. But now, I understand that this table is the center of the family, the place that connected us during difficult years. Continuing to clean, we found my mother's old cast iron pot. The enamel was peeling off, and there were some black burn marks on the bottom. I asked my mother why she still kept this pot, even though she had many newer pots. My mother smiled, her eyes distant. "Every scratch and burn mark on this pot is a trace of the years I tried my best to cook simple but nutritious meals for my family. When my father went to work far away, I still stayed home to cook, waiting for the day he returned so the whole family could gather together again." Listening to my mother, I saw the image of a strong, hard-working woman who loved her family with all her heart. That cast iron pot was not just an ordinary kitchen utensil, but also a symbol of the love and sacrifice that my mother had for her family. Continuing to clean, I accidentally found a wooden toolbox. Inside were small tools that my grandfather used to fix things around the house. When he saw the box, my father stopped, his face filled with emotion. My father told me about my grandfather, whom I only knew from a few old photos in the album. He was a repairman in the village, famous for his strict personality, but very loving towards his children and grandchildren. My father said that my grandfather often took him around the village, helping people fix things to earn money to support his family. Every time he finished fixing something, he would tell me, "What you fix and preserve is what really matters." He taught me how to save and appreciate what I have. Maybe that's why I keep these old things, even though they are no longer useful. My father looked at my grandfather's toolbox, his face full of pride. I felt like I understood more about an important part of my father's life, about the values that my grandfather had passed on to him. That wooden box was not just a toolbox, but also a precious keepsake, a family legacy that my father had carefully preserved. When I moved to clean up the old drawers in my room, I found a box containing my father's handwritten letters. The letters had faded and crumpled over time. I curiously picked them up and read them, and realized that they were the letters my father sent to my mother during the years he was away working. My mother told me that at that time, life was still difficult. My father had to work far away to earn money to support the family. Every time he missed my mother and me, he wrote letters back. In those letters, my father sent his love, longing, and words of encouragement to my mother to steadfastly overcome the difficult days. I read each letter. Each line contained my father's patience, love, and sacrifice. They were not flowery letters, but simple, sincere words from the heart of a man for the woman he loved. Those letters were not only a part of my parents' memories, but also proof of their enduring love that overcame all difficulties. Mom still kept those letters for many years. Even though time has passed and many things have changed, the love between Dad and Mom still remains forever. As time passed, my parents built a home together. I still remember the days when I was young, when my whole family had to live frugally, but my parents always created a warm and happy atmosphere. During the cleaning process, we found the armchair where my father used to sit and read books to me every night. That chair had witnessed many happy moments of the family. My father said that, despite many difficulties in life, he still tried to spend time with me, read books to me, and taught me the first lessons of life. My parents also kept the old books they bought for me when I went to school. They were worn books, but each page contained memories of the days when my parents tried everything to help me get a full education. Although I began to understand and appreciate the memories my parents kept, the cleaning process was not smooth. Whenever I mentioned throwing something away, my mother frowned, her eyes full of hesitation, and my father looked at me sternly, as if I wanted to erase the family's memories. One day, while cleaning the living room, I decided to suggest throwing away a few small items that were no longer used. There was an old teapot, a few faded artificial flower vases, and a chipped lampshade. I thought these items were no longer suitable, but as soon as I mentioned them, my mother immediately objected. "Those items are memories. You don't understand," my mother said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "This teapot was a gift from your grandmother to your father and I on our wedding day. Every time I see it, I remember the days when we were young, when we started our lives together in an empty house, and only this teapot was the newest and most beautiful." I was speechless at what my mother said. It seemed that for my parents, everything in the house had a profound meaning. But I still tried to explain the benefits of a tidier living space, with less furniture, to help the spirit feel more comfortable and relaxed. However, my words did not seem to convince my parents. That evening, after the tension eased, my father gently asked me to sit down and began to share. He said that, although I had grown up and had a different perspective on life, there were values that I could not fully understand until I had experienced them. For my parents, each item was a part of their journey, things that they had built together from scratch. My father said that when he was young, he and my mother had to work hard to earn money to buy each small item in the house. Each item was associated with a story that now, although old and no longer used, were still precious memories that my parents could not throw away. After my father's sharing, I gradually understood that keeping old things is not conservatism or stubbornness, but a way for my parents to stay connected to the past, to the beautiful memories they experienced together. As time passed, my parents built a home together. I still remember the days when I was young, when my whole family had to live frugally, but my parents always created a warm and happy atmosphere. During the cleaning process, we found the armchair where my father used to sit and read books to me every night. That chair had witnessed many happy moments of the family. My father said that, despite many difficulties in life, he still tried to spend time with me, read books to me, and taught me the first lessons of life. My parents also kept the old books they bought for me when I went to school. They were worn books, but each page contained memories of the days when my parents tried everything to help me get a full education. Although I began to understand and appreciate the memories my parents kept, the cleaning process was not smooth. Whenever I mentioned throwing something away, my mother frowned, her eyes full of hesitation, and my father looked at me sternly, as if I wanted to erase the family's memories. One day, while cleaning the living room, I decided to suggest throwing away a few small items that were no longer used. There was an old teapot, a few faded artificial flower vases, and a chipped lampshade. I thought these items were no longer suitable, but as soon as I mentioned them, my mother immediately objected. "Those items are memories. You don't understand," my mother said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "This teapot was a gift from your grandmother to your father and I on our wedding day. Every time I see it, I remember the days when we were young, when we started our lives together in an empty house, and only this teapot was the newest and most beautiful." I was speechless at what my mother said. It seemed that for my parents, everything in the house had a profound meaning. But I still tried to explain the benefits of a tidier living space, with less furniture, to help the spirit feel more comfortable and relaxed. However, my words did not seem to convince my parents. That evening, after the tension eased, my father gently asked me to sit down and began to share. He said that although I had grown up and had a different perspective on life, there were values that I could not fully understand until I had experienced them. For my parents, each item was a part of their journey, things that they had built together from scratch. My father said that when he was young, he and my mother had to work hard to earn money to buy each small item in the house. Each item was associated with a story that now, although old and no longer used, were still precious memories that my parents could not throw away. After my father's sharing, I gradually understood that keeping old things was not conservatism or stubbornness, but a way for my parents to stay connected to the past, to the beautiful memories they had experienced together. After that emotional conversation, I no longer tried to force my parents to throw away old things. Instead, I suggested that instead of throwing them away, we could rearrange these things, creating a memory corner in the house to keep the most important things. My parents seemed satisfied with this idea and agreed. During the rearrangement process, I discovered many small items that I had never noticed before. Every time I picked up an item, my mother or father had a story to tell, and gradually, I realized that this house was not only a place to live, but also a living museum of the family. The old wall clock. This is the clock that my grandparents gave to my parents when they first got married. Mom said that every time she looked at this watch, she remembered the first years of her marriage, when life was difficult, but full of joy and hope. Embroidered handkerchief. My mother still keeps the handkerchief that she embroidered herself when she was a young girl. She said that when my father first met her, he teased her that she was so skillful in embroidering such beautiful flowers. This small item has become a part of her love and memories of her youth. My school bag. When I was little, I used this bag to go to school. Every time my parents saw it, they remembered the days when they took me to school and the evenings when they sat together to study. Although the bag was worn and torn, I couldn't deny that it was a part of the past that I wanted to keep. Rearranging these items was not just a cleaning process, but also a journey to discover the values that my parents had passed on to me. Each item holds a profound lesson about life, love, and perseverance. Although I still pursue a minimalist lifestyle, I understand that sometimes memories are things that we cannot and should not throw away. One time, while cleaning the corner of the bookshelf, I unexpectedly found my old diary, recording my thoughts and feelings when I was a child. I sat down, flipped through the discolored pages, and slowly read the scribbled lines of my childhood. Those diary pages took me back in time, back to the carefree years when I was a child, when life was simple and everything seemed full of hope. Each diary page reminded me of the time when my parents devoted all their heart to raising and educating me. There were passages where I wrote about evenings sitting by the lamplight, listening to my father tell stories, or my mother teaching me how to do homework. I realized that, although there were times when I did not understand how my parents thought, their love and sacrifice for me were unconditional and enduring. Flipping through the pages, I suddenly realized that I had grown up thanks to the values my parents had taught me. The stories about my parents are not only memories, but also the foundation that helps me have the life I have today. Even though I have changed over time, what my parents taught me will always be an indispensable part of who I am. Gradually, old items have become an indispensable part of my life. Every time I look at the corner displaying the memories we created, I feel warm and grateful. I no longer see these items as burdens or cumbersome, but consider them as precious pieces in the picture of my family's life. My parents also began to feel more comfortable when looking at the items in the corner of memories. They told me new stories, memories that they used to keep secret. There were happy stories and there were also sad stories. But whether happy or sad, they were all precious pieces of memories, helping us to bond and understand each other better. Every time I go home, I spend time sitting with my parents, looking back at the items in the memory corner. We tell each other stories about the past, laugh about memorable moments, and are proud of what the whole family has overcome together. That memory corner is not only a place to keep things, but also a place to keep the love, sacrifice, and gratitude that I have for my parents. A few years later, I got married and moved out, but the love and family values were always present in my heart. Every time I visited my parents, I sat with them, recalling each story, each memory associated with the items in the house. Each item seemed to come alive, like a companion of my family over the years. When I had children, I began to tell them about my grandparents' items, about the stories of love and sacrifice that my grandparents had given to the family. I hoped that, through those stories, my children would understand and appreciate family values, know how to love and respect the past. I took pictures of important items, kept them in an electronic album to carry with me, so that no matter where I was, I could still feel the love and connection of my family. That album is not only about photos, but also about my parents' message of gratitude, sacrifice, and unconditional love. The story of the old items in my parents' house is not just about keeping or discarding inanimate objects. It is a story about love, sacrifice, and family connection through each generation. Each old item is a milestone, a testament to the love my parents have for me and for each other. From the journey of rearranging the house with my parents, I have learned more about life and about the value of family. Those lessons are not only teachings, but also vivid stories through each item, each memory. Now, my parents' old house is not only the place where I grew up, but also the place I return to find memories, lessons, and precious values. I understand that no matter how life changes, that house will always be a place that holds memories, love, and family values that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Time passes, but my parents' house remains the same. Every time I return, I feel like I am entering a peaceful place, where time seems to stand still. The old photos, it's the worn armchair, the antique clock, and the old wooden dining table are still in their original places, like familiar friends who never leave. Once, I looked at the old wooden table that had shared many cozy meals with my family and asked my parents, "Why don't you replace it with a newer one?" "It's too old." My father smiled and replied gently, "You may think this table is old, but to us, it is a symbol of the family. Every scratch and dent marks the years when the whole family sat down to eat together. Those marks are proof of how many years our family has been together. To my parents, it is still as beautiful as the first day." Listening to my father, I seemed to see before my eyes the image of my young parents, just starting their married life with this wooden table. It is not only an object, but also a symbol of family ties, of the love that my parents have cultivated every day. Listening to my father, I seemed to see before my eyes the image of my young parents, just starting their married life with this wooden table. It is not only an object, but also a symbol of family ties, of the love that my parents have cultivated every day. One day, while cleaning the living room with my mother, I noticed the old chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The lamp had darkened over time, some places were yellowed, but the light it emitted was still as warm as ever. I curiously asked my mother about the lamp, and she smiled and told me a story that I had never known. "Your father personally chose this chandelier when we first moved into this house," my mother began. "At that time, he wanted something special to light up the living room, where the whole family would gather and chat after a long day. My father said that this lamp would be the light of the house, something that would make us feel warm, no matter how difficult it was. I looked up at the chandelier, feeling the warmth it brought, and suddenly realized that it was not just a lighting item, but also a symbol of the love and care that my parents had for the family. My father always wanted to bring the best things to the house, and this lamp was proof of that. While cleaning the attic, I accidentally found a box full of old black and white photos. They were family photos from when my parents were young. Pictures of my grandparents, relatives that I only knew through words. Looking at those photos, I felt like I was discovering a new world, a part of the past that I had never known. My parents sat down next to me, looking at each photo with me. My father told me about my grandparents, about my deceased loved ones. There were photos capturing simple moments, like my grandfather and father fixing a car in the yard, or my grandmother working hard over a pot of rice. But to my parents, those were priceless moments. Those photos were not just images, but also stories, lessons about simplicity, sacrifice, and gratitude that my parents always carried with them. Each photo captures a part of life, a memorable moment, and I feel lucky to have heard those stories from my parents. Inside the box of black and white photos, I also found a letter from my grandfather to my father. The letter was yellowed and crumpled, but his strong handwriting was still clear. It was a letter he wrote to my father when he first went to work far away. In the letter, my grandfather wrote advice on how to live, how to treat others, and words of encouragement for my father. He told him to always preserve the family, always remember his roots, and cherish the values he had passed on. My father sat quietly reading the letter, his eyes filled with nostalgia. When he finished reading, he looked at me, his voice deep in thought. "Your grandfather always taught me to live responsibly and always put family first." What he taught became a guiding principle for my father, and I want you to understand that no matter how life changes, family is still the most important place. My grandfather's letter helped me understand more deeply the value of family. It is not only a place to return to, but also a source, a place that contains lessons that this generation passes on to the next. When cleaning up the corner of the bookshelf in my parents' bedroom, I found an old notebook of my mother's. The pages were yellowed, but each line of my mother's handwriting was still there. It was the notebook where my mother recorded her thoughts, feelings, and small plans during the early years of marriage. My mother wrote about the difficulties she and my father faced, about the days when she worried about the future, but still kept hope and love. Those notebook pages are proof of the patience and love she had for her family. My mother's notebook is a treasure trove of words of encouragement that she wrote for herself during difficult times. I realized that my mother was not only a strong wife and mother, but also a woman with dreams, hopes, and worries, but she always put the happiness of her family first. As time passed, I got married and had my own family. The souvenirs that my parents kept, the stories they told, became an indispensable part of my journey. Even though I lived in a faraway city, every time I went home to visit my parents, I felt warm when I saw familiar objects, the marks of time that were still there. When my child grew up, I began to tell him stories about his grandparents, about the souvenirs that his grandparents had kept for so many years. I wanted him to understand that family values are not only in words but also in simple objects, the memories that his grandparents had worked hard to preserve. I also took pictures of each item in the family's memory corner, saved it in an album to carry with me. That album is not only pictures, but also a message from my parents about love, gratitude, and appreciation for the little things in life. Finally, I realized that the old items in my parents' house are not just objects but pieces of life, memories, and love that they have for each other and for me. Every time I return home, sit with my parents, look at the items in the memory corner, I feel peace in my heart, feel the unconditional love that they have given me. The stories about my parents, about the difficult years, about each item have become invaluable lessons that I carry with me throughout my life. I understand that, no matter how modern or changed life is, family values, love, and sacrifice will always be the source of strength to help me overcome all difficulties. My parents' house, with every item, every story, every trace of time, will forever be the place for me to return to. That is where I found myself, where I understood the profound meaning of family. And I know family love is the only thing that transcends all time limits, the most precious legacy that my parents left me.